Hey everybody, thanks for logging in. Welcome to the Energy Storage Series webinar. I'm Madeline, and I'm the Energy Storage Manager here at Soligent, and Julia Bird is also on the line, making sure that all of our technical elements run smoothly. So thanks for hopping in. If you haven't joined one of our webinars before, I'll give you a little bit of a rundown. These are meant to be informal ways to answer common questions that installers or homeowners might have about energy storage. So feel free to chime in with the chat or questions. I am kind of just doing this in an ad lib setting so that it's informal and approachable and easily digested for any viewer. So without further ado, I imagine you can still see this toolbar, so I don't know how to necessarily make it go away, but that's all right. Okay. We'll just talk a little bit about who I am and what I do at Soligent, and then dive into what I typically like to use as an overview of what are the distinctions between a grid tie solar system by itself as opposed to a solar plus storage system, because there are a lot of similarities, but the distinctions are what I want to focus on so that installers and homeowners understand where those two types of systems differ. We will review the three complete options of these, which is microinverters, DC optimizers, or a string inverter, for how you would retrofit those, because retrofitting is what we are talking about today, and how you can add storage to existing solar installations from a residential perspective. And sometimes when you do these retrofits, we have options for batteries, and sometimes based on our grid tie inverter, we have one battery option, so not a lot of choices. So we're going to talk about when can we choose and when are we nailed in with our battery choices. So without further ado, I'm Madeline. I'm the Energy Storage Manager here at Soligent. I've been with Soligent for almost 2 years, and it has really been an exciting year, particularly in 2021 as the Energy Storage Manager. We've seen really a big growth, I would say, just in the last month of storage really picking up and running with things. So I'm excited for homeowners. I'm excited for installers. Systems are getting easier to install, and I'm here to support everyone in learning and understanding how energy storage systems work. And the way that I like to support our installers, our homeowners, our account managers is to identify what systems work for a given homeowner, help sizing systems, because there's certainly more of a sizing element when it comes to batteries than there is with just solar. With just solar, you're pretty much slapping some panels, as many as you can fit on the roof. And you want to be able, if you're getting net metering, you want as many panels as you can on the roof so that you can sell back to the utility and get credited for that energy. With storage, there's a little bit more of a nuance because it's strictly for how much battery power is going to be paired with that solar for your house in emergency settings. So that's different than just saying, I want as much solar as I can so that I can feed it back to the grid as much as I can. You know, I'm going to try again to get this toolbar to go away.
Madeline, I don't think we can't see it on our end.
Okay, great. Thanks, Julia. That's good because I just want the slides to be uninhibited. Great. Thank you. Okay. So if we're looking at solar only, this is just a schematic, a little block diagram of a setup for your grid tie system. So you've seen this a million times, I'm sure. You have your solar panels feeding your PV inverter. Your PV inverter can be either microinverters, DC optimized, or a string inverter. That's going to be feeding the meter to the grid. That's controlling the flow either out to the grid or into your home. And those are really the only components that we are considering. So it's relatively straightforward when you're looking at solar only. And hopefully this is something that is familiar to you. So with a bidirectional meter, you can either sell to the grid or consume at your house. Here, we're still looking at the beginning of the system is the same. And that's because we're still starting with a PV inverter, we're feeding the meter, and we're going to our home. This is defined as an AC coupled system. And that's because we have two inverters. This is the defining element of an AC coupled system. We have a PV inverter taking our solar powers, making DC and converting that to AC to feed your home. Then you have an additional battery-based inverter that's taking your DC battery energy, and that is converting to AC to, again, feed to your house. So we're converting from DC to AC one time at the PV inverter and a second time at the hybrid inverter. That is the definition of an AC coupled system. So depending on the size of your existing PV inverter, you may have more or less of these options to determine what can I pair with my PV inverter. And we're going to dive into these brands kind of individually, but I want to talk about sizing as a limitation, because you want your hybrid inverter to be equal to or greater than the size of your PV inverter. Because let's just use this, an extreme example. Let's say I have a 15 kilowatt Fronius Prima. That's my PV inverter. And let's say my hybrid inverter is a 4 kilowatt Magnum inverter or a 4 kilowatt Schneider inverter. If I have the sun, if the grid goes down and the sun is fully shining, that means I have 15 kilowatts coming from my PV array into my hybrid inverter, and that is too much. The hybrid inverter will be unable to output all of the power that it's receiving. So by making our hybrid inverter larger, we are ensuring that if our PV inverter is operating at its maximum capacity, the hybrid inverter can output all of that power. Also, I want to note this. If your home is not using much power, but it's sunny, then the function of the hybrid inverter is to also charge your battery bank. So if I use my battery the night before and the sun is shining and I don't have many loads on in my house, my hybrid inverter is capable of charging my battery and not passing through the solar power and feeding my house. So that's another function. Whenever I'm talking to installers and we're talking about a retrofit, the first question I ask is, what's the size of the PV inverter? Because if we say we have a 5 kilowatt inverter, great. I can choose from any output that is rated to 5 kilowatts or less. If I have a 10 kilowatt inverter, we have to adapt our options based on that size. Then the second question that I typically ask is, how much of the PV, I guess this is twofold, how much of the PV do you want to remain on in the event of an outage? Because we want to know how much of your house you want to power. When the PV inverter is on, typically you're feeding your main service panel. So 100% of the PV is feeding your house. In the event of an outage, if I only have a sub panel with a few select loads on my home, let's say fridge, lights, television, fans, Wi-Fi, those 5 loads will be physically moved to a sub panel, and then my PV will also be moved to that sub panel. So if you have the case of microinverters, you can move a string of microinverters to your sub panel. That means that the remaining grid tie strings will go down in the event of an outage. So you want to make sure that when you're sizing the PV based on your critical load sub panel, that the quantity of panels matches the amount of battery you are pairing onto that sub panel. So that's a really important feature. Okay, let's just dive into Enphase. And I'm going to talk right now just based on the IQ6 and IQ7 line. The Enphase IQ8 line is coming out The full product launch is happening on the 28th of this month. And then we will see that product shipped within 2021. So definitely worth learning about the IQ8 in your repertoire or in your tool belt, because that will be relevant soon. But I want to talk about systems that we can deploy today. If we get through this session, you will be able to act based on the equipment discussed today. So we're just going to review this. We have the sun shining on our array, and we have each panel being paired with a microinverter. This microinverter is then feeding our IQ combiner, just like a typical grid tie solution. Here is where things change. The smart switch, the N-Power smart switch, is where a lot of different components are landing. So this is where our backup subpanel is going to be attached, because our backup subpanel needs to be communicating with the PV, and that's via the smart switch. So we have our backup panel feeding the smart switch. We have our backup loads feeding our subpanel. Great. We also have a battery input in our smart switch. So that is where our N-Charge 10 or our N-Charge 3 batteries will be feeding the smart switch. With a single N-Power, we can install between 3.3 and 41 kilowatt hours. That would be 1 N-Charge 3 or up to 4 N-Charge 10s. Rule of thumb, just based on what we're seeing, people are typically installing 2 or 3 N-Charge 10s. So that, and not to have option paralysis here by saying, how many N-Charge 3s, how many N-Charge 10s do I need? If we stick to 2 or 3 N-Charge 10s, that's in the typical scope of what homeowners are getting installed. So then the main panel would have any excess PV that might go out during an outage. There's a chart that I reference almost daily with the maximum amount of microinverters that you can pair with a given battery. So similar to our PV inverter, hybrid inverter relationship, we also want to consider the amount of micros that are feeding our N-Charge system. So I don't have it memorized, but off the top of my head, let's say we have 20 IQ 7 pluses. That might equate roughly to a single N-Charge 10. That means if I have more than 20 IQ 7 pluses on my home, they will not be landing on this backup subpanel. They will be landing on the main load panel in order to make sure that the batteries do not get overcharged. So there's a maximum number of panels, but there's not a maximum number of batteries. I mean, you feasibly could put 5 or 6 panels on an N-Charge 40 battery bank. It would just mean that you're going to have multiple days of sun exposure in order to charge that bank fully. So there is not really a maximum number of batteries, but there's definitely a maximum number of microinverters. Similarly, the N-phase N-Charge system, the N-Charge batteries, must be installed on an N-phase microinverter system. If you have N-phase microinverters, you may choose a different hybrid inverter system, but if you definitely want an N-Charge battery, you must have N-phase microinverters. Shifting gears to SolarEdge. The storage system has been around for a really long time. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the StoreEdge battery with the LG Chem Resu 10H or Resu 16. Things are changing a little bit. SolarEdge has launched the Energy Hub. So they're really calling the Energy Hub this storage with HD wave technology. That's sort of the fine print under what is an Energy Hub. And previously, we had our autoformer when paired with the StoreEdge. Now we have a backup interface. So SolarEdge recently launched actually a new backup interface SKU that incorporates the slim CTs. So CTs are important to storage-based systems so that you know how much current the house is needing. And it's it's interpreting the power coming through your main service panel. So our backup interface has the newest model, has the slim CTs already installed. Okay. Let's talk about the distinctions between an HD wave and an energy hub inverter. When I have an HD wave, as pictured here, I can take my panels with my P series optimizers and feed my HD wave. Then I can take my HD wave and feed my house or the grid. This is very similar to this first solar only diagram. If you want to add batteries to an HD wave that's already installed, you must install a secondary hybrid inverter, namely Schneider, Outback, or Solar, as far as Soligent is concerned. If you do not have an energy hub inverter, you cannot add a battery. So the HD wave can either be replaced by an energy hub and a backup interface, or it can add an additional solar edge, non-solar edge hybrid inverter with a non-solar edge battery. In the case of the HD wave, if you're going to every homeowner and saying, even if you don't want batteries today, we're installing an energy hub with the potential that you might add the backup interface and the batteries later, we are battery ready. So the difference, but to some extent, installing an HD wave is battery ready if you know you're going to add like a solar inverter with Simplify, let's just say. That's still battery ready, but you have to add an additional inverter. Because SolarEdge is an inherently DC coupled solution where you can install only one inverter, the traditional battery ready solution is PV, power optimizers, HD wave. So that when I'm ready, all I have to do is slap on a backup interface and the SolarEdge battery, and then that's the only addition I have to make. So you're making less of an investment later down the line by adding the backup interface and the battery than you are with installing a whole additional battery-based inverter. Where we are today, the backup interface can have up to 3 energy hub inverters, and each of those energy hub inverters can have between 1 and 2 batteries. So SolarEdge really is posing themselves for whole home backup, because if you're having up to 3 energy hub inverters, that's plenty to power a full house to cover your whole 100 amp or 200 amp main service panel. String inverters. Okay. AC coupling with string inverters has also been going on for a very long time, even longer than we've seen the StoreEdge with LG Chem. So let's review. Very similar to what we looked at before. We have our panels. We don't actually have our panels displayed here, but our panels are feeding our PV inverter. This is our PV inverter icon. And that is feeding, again, our critical load sub panel. Oh, I'm going to take a minute now to talk about critical load sub panels versus whole home backup. My personal opinion is that load control is going to be the most talked about and considered and innovative, if you will, new piece of technology that energy storage is going to see in the next 5 to 10 years. And what is load control? Right now, you have to physically distinguish your critical load panel from your main service panel. And this can be somewhat cumbersome. You have to physically move any loads that were previously on your whole home service panel into your sub panel. With the advent of load control, this works in a few different ways. Our different brands are approaching load control in different ways. So Enphase has these contactors where you can add 2 breakers with relays on them on your main service panel. And let's say those are feeding your air conditioner and your clothes dryer. We can put all of our N-Charge batteries now on the main service panel, but with the addition of these contactors, when the battery is seeing that the home is drawing too much, it can alert the service panel to turn off those large 240 amp breakers. And this is really valuable because load shedding in the event of needing to preserve your battery is the number one thing you can do to prolong the life of your battery during an outage. So Enphase is doing designated breakers for any given 240 volt load. Generac also has this capability with their smart management modules today. Those are essentially the same, performing the same feature as Enphase's. Schneider is launching an energy center, which is essentially a fully automated main service panel, meaning every single load, every single circuit breaker has the ability to be shedded from your controller. And this really enables the homeowner to have full control over what loads are being essentially deemed critical or deemed not necessary during an outage. And this type of flexibility is going to be so helpful in installing a more modest size battery on a whole house and putting the onus or putting the responsibility on the homeowner to say, if you have 10 kilowatt hours, you have the control over what you want to use that for. So if you know you want your air conditioner, you can run your air conditioner on a 10 kilowatt hour battery. But if that drains in however many hours, you made that choice. So there's similar products like Lumen. Lumen is an accessory that you're putting onto your main service panel that allows you to modify up to 12 circuits. So that's plenty in order to shed large loads during an outage. And Span is really the other ultimate automator, if you will, because it is a main service panel that's also fully automated. So these types of equipment are really kind of where this category is transforming, because not needing to install a critical load panel saves time. It allows anything on your home to be eligible when it needs to be. And it's really flexible, and you can see how much your loads are using when an outage occurs. And that's kind of where the future is heading. And also to add this, that Generac currently has the smart management modules for load control, but they're coming out with the Power Manager, which is also a main service panel extension, like accessory, that pigtails onto the main panel in order to enable the automation for those loads. So keep your ears perked for load control equipment. Okay, back to the XW Pro. So today, again, most people are using a critical load panel and, one or two hybrid inverters plus their battery. So that's what we're looking at. This type of setup with your PV inverter and then your hybrid string inverter is how a retrofit will work with Solarc or Outback as well. So you would just insert your Solarc or insert your Outback Radian or Skybox into the XW Pro, and they will all function very similar. Okay, let's talk about batteries briefly, and then I will get to your questions. Okay, we're going to review the same diagram with the AC coupled options, and then I'm taking it one step further to say, what are our battery options? So up until now, we've really talked mostly about the inverter selection, because the inverter is what's immediately relating to your PV inverter, your hybrid inverter relating to your PV inverter. But what is our battery powering our hybrid inverter? Where's this energy coming from? So if you have Enphase microinverters and you want an Enphase battery, all in one solution, the Encharge 10 has to work with the microinverters. So we don't really get a choice here. With Enphase Micros, Smart Switch, Encharge 10. That's your full Encharge kit and caboodle. With Outback, I'm going to skip Outback for a second and talk about Panasonic. The Panasonic Evervolt has an AC coupled solution, and it comes all in one with the Evervolt battery as well. Panasonic, because it's a 48-volt system, you could use a different battery, but most of the time that we're selling Panasonic, it's the full Evervolt Plus kit, which includes the Panasonic hybrid inverter and the Panasonic battery. You know, it looks similar, it operates together, it's all pre-programmed together. So when you do Panasonic, although with an asterisk, if you will, you could use a different 48-volt battery, you're probably going to go with the Panasonic battery as well. Okay, Schneider has options, Solarc has options, so let's skip those and go to Sonnen. The Sonnen core is an all-in-one solution in a single enclosure. It includes the inverter and the 2 batteries, the 2 5 kilowatt-hour batteries to create a 10 kilowatt-hour solution. So if you have an existing SMA string inverter or an existing M series N-phase system or an HD wave, then you can pair that with the Sonnen core. And the Sonnen is all in one with the battery and the inverter together. So no choices there. And then in terms of other kind of kitted solutions, so to speak, the SMA Sunny Boy storage comes with, it's sort of a 3-pronged solution. We have the Sunny Boy storage, battery-based inverter, the automatic backup unit, which is our grid farming device, and the BYD battery box. So again, you're getting the BYD if you're getting the Sunny Boy storage. Between Outback, Schneider, and Solarc, these are 48-volt DC battery agnostic solutions. So what does that mean? That means between an advanced AGM like the Northstar Blue batteries, or Simplify, or Discover batteries, or Fortress, we could pair those 4 solutions with either Outback, Schneider, or Solarc. If we want to take this one step further, all of these can be programmed manually and would just operate but communicating via voltage. However, Fortress has closed loop communications compatible with Solarc. That means that in addition to voltage, state of charge is also communicated to the inverter. So it's an enhanced level of communication and compatibility between the batteries. Discover, and I will also note, the Fortress battery has this capability with Solarc. It also has the capability with the XW Pro from Schneider and the SMA Sunny Island. I don't typically talk about the Sunny Island a whole lot because it's sort of a niche product, but Fortress is closed loop capable for communicating with the Sunny Island. Discover is inherently closed loop communicating abilities with the XW Pro from Schneider. However, you can add an additional link gateway card to enable Discover to also be closed loop communicate compatibility with Solarc or this Outback Skybox, and I also want to say the Sunny Island. Then last but not least, Simplify has their Amplify unit, which is their model that has the closed loop comms with Solarc. So we have some kind of brand loyalty if you want closed loop communications, but you can have the Simplify Phi 3.8 kilowatt hour standard unit installed with any of the Skybox or the Radian or the XW Pro or the Solarc 12K. So we can really mix and match, if you will, any 48-volt battery with any 48-volt inverter. Okay. That was a lot. I'm going to stay on this slide for anybody with questions. And Julia, if everything is looking good, then I'll just go to the next slide and I can show you my contact information and we can wrap it up.
Questions. The first one is, what battery other than LG Chem for existing SolarEdge PV system?
Great question. As of, again, today, October 20th, it's only SolarEdge with LG Chem. However, the SolarEdge battery is being released as we speak. So once Soligent sends their purchase order for the SolarEdge battery to SolarEdge, we are expecting to get the SolarEdge battery, which will be the second and only other alternative compatible with SolarEdge, hopefully by the end of this year. So I would say fingers crossed for December, if not January or February, for the SolarEdge battery.
And then we have another one from earlier that says, when sizing AC coupled systems to power a critical loads panel, is the sizing requirement to be able to power the largest branch circuit?
So that's a really, really good question, actually. You could size it based on kind of the worst case scenario, which would basically be the entire loads panel running simultaneously. However, if a lot of this comes down to homeowner education. So if you sit down with your homeowner and you say, when the grid goes down and you understand that you're running on battery power only, if you have, let's just say, a few kitchen outlets capable, you have to tell the homeowner, you cannot run your blender and your microwave and your toaster oven at the same time. So you don't necessarily have to size your inverter to run 3 1,000-watt appliances simultaneously. Because realistically, if you say it's either the blender or the microwave or the toaster oven, then you know you only are going to be experiencing 1,000 watts running at a given time. So I think to be cautious, you could size it based on, a few of these medium-sized appliances running simultaneously. But if you're educating the homeowners enough to say, listen, all of this is capable of running, but none of it should be running at the same time, that's really the biggest hurdle, is making sure everything isn't running at the same time. So I would say that's really based on the discretion of how adaptable you think the homeowner is going to be to kind of hunkering down and living in a pseudo state of emergency when it comes to balancing their power needs.
And then we have, will Soligent be offering the new Tygo storage solution?
That's a great question. Soligent does not have a relationship really with Tygo a lot right now, but I'm glad you asked, because that's certainly something that we could be pursuing in the future. But at this time, the answer is no.
And then last one is, what is the factor affecting the storage capacity?
Great question. Okay, I'll just use a few anecdotes. So I have a sense meter on my house, and it really has helped me understand, just have some visibility on how much energy am I using at my house. For last week, it's been relatively mild weather in Austin, Texas. So for across 7 days, my usage daily is between 4 and 10 kilowatt hours, roughly. And that's a decent spread. So 4 kilowatt hours for a day means if I had a 12 kilowatt hour battery bank, that could get me easily through 3 days, 3 complete 24-hour periods. But if I have a 10 kilowatt hour day, my 10 kilowatt hour battery bank could potentially be drawn in 1 day. However, when I run my air conditioner, since I'm grid connected, I don't necessarily think about it. I'm grateful that I'm grid connected, and I turn my air conditioning on when my house gets too warm. If the AC is on, I could definitely easily be pushing 30 to 45 kilowatt hours in a day. So the capacity of your battery in kilowatt hours is most easily tied to the duration you're running your largest loads. That makes it a lot easier if your critical load panel is sized, let's just say, without any 240 volt loads, and it's only small 120 amp appliances that are drawing like 10 amps or less. Then your bank really could last for a long time. And here's another thing I will say. I would advise anyone who's considering a battery to slap on a sense meter. Or there are a ton of, I've talked about this in months past during one of my webinars, but there are a ton of whole home monitors that you can get for the house They don't necessarily have to have the smart function to learn all of your appliances, but it can just read the total kilowatt hours of your house. Sense, I want to say Ecobee is a brand. They're a number. If you just Google home energy monitor, when you install solar for someone, throw on an energy monitor so that you can get a good understanding of what the homeowner is actually using when you want to add a battery, because it's really hard to know. Like, I don't know, I just live in my house. It's a 1,600 square foot house and I live my life like normal. I don't necessarily know what that equates to in terms of kilowatt hours. So having a monitor helps, and reviewing loads one by one, honestly, with the homeowner. It seems tedious, but it's very worthwhile so that the homeowner knows these loads are what will be on during an outage and what are contributing to the decline of my battery, so that they know what draws a lot. But again, air conditioners, well pumps, motors, and compressors of any kind are really going to be the biggest draws because they take a lot of power, more than anything else.
Awesome. And then we have, which ESS system can dump 1 kilowatt an hour 4 to 9 p.m. to offset SCE TOU 4 to 9 p.m. solar panel usage?
That is a really good question. I didn't even talk about time of use at all today, which I'm glad you brought that up. So although we think about storage typically for emergency backup, time of use and rate changes is a really great way to kind of future-proof your home from experiencing those increases. Let's just review the ones that are listed right now. Enphase, yes, time of use compatible. The Outback Skybox, super compatible with time of use charging. I think you can give it 32 unique time of use parameters, determining your day of the week, hours, etc. So Outback Skybox, definitely. The Radiant probably can too, but it's not as sophisticated as the Skybox is. Evervolt, I want to say yes, I'm not 100% sure. Schneider definitely has time of use scheduling. Solark has time of use scheduling. Sonnen has time of use scheduling, and the Sunny Boy storage I would have to double check, but since it's designed as a grid type battery backup battery, I would be like 99% confident that time of use scheduling is also something that can be enabled. And again, these are all your different settings. So like, let's say Enphase, I think off the top of my head, they have like self-generation mode, emergency backup mode, and time of use mode. If you operate in time of use mode the majority of the time, just make sure that you enable it so that if a weather alert is telling your Enphase system a storm might be occurring, why don't you switch from time of use to emergency backup mode? That's a really good feature so that it can adjust and start saving more power so that you can prepare for an emergency event. So that's a feature that's common also for being able to toggle between time of use or emergency backup mode.
Awesome. The next question is Generac coming out with a new storage solution that is supposed to be priced competitively?
Yes. So Generac has a ton of features coming out. And again, I'm kind of waiting until next year to dive into those, but they acquired Chilicon, so they're launching the Power Micro, which is their Generac branded microinverter. Because that being, a lot of systems have AC coupled requirements, and this is a really interesting thing I just learned about in Austin Energy. Right now, in order to go solar in Austin, it must be an AC coupled solution because they're telling the homeowners all of your production has to be on one side of the meter. You cannot have storage in front of your meter. So Generac is launching a microinverter product. They're also launching a DC generator, which enables all of your charging to be from your solar, your battery, or a generator on the DC side. So that's like uber efficient for making sure your battery is fully charged at all times in order to prepare for charging your home. In terms of price breaks, I don't have details on that yet, but Generac really is kind of, in addition to their power manager that I discussed earlier, Generac is diving into the deep end and committing themselves to the energy storage industry with all of these products. Like, They have a DC coupled solution. This solution will also be AC compatible once the micros come out. They're doing the power manager. They're doing the power generator. It's really, they're answering every question an installer has and providing a solution to it. So keep your eyes out for Generac, particularly in Q2.
Awesome. Next questions. What about EV charging? What about future bi-directional chargers?
You know, that's a really good question too. And EV charging, I don't want to be such a pessimist, but in some ways, EV charging is not super compatible with solar. Fast chargers draw, I want to say, up to 60 amps. For 60 amps at a given time, that is in no way, shape, or form compatible with a battery or with performing off grid. I think with a slow charger, sure, you have 120 volts pulling 5 amps, that's fine. That's a load that could be managed by a battery. But if we're really looking at 60 amps for 30 minutes to 2 hours, like, no way, Jose. So I think we have a little ways to go in terms of making EVs feel compatible with solar, just because having fast charging is not compatible with the way that solar has operated thus far. In terms of bidirectional charging, I think vehicle to grid is novel and cool and will certainly have a place in the energy industry in general. I just don't know how it's going to look residentially. I know that the F-150 Lightning has talked about this a little bit from Ford, but I don't know how it's going to look in terms of like actually being installed on main service panels in homes, because there's a lot of configuration that needs to happen. The utility has to be on board. There has to be appropriate monitoring. You want to make sure your car still has enough charge so that you can drive it most of the time. I think that we're really just in the beginning stages of vehicle to grid. So I don't necessarily know where that's going to go, but I know there's definitely going to be talk about that in, the next few years. And I think that'll most likely look kind of like from a microgrid perspective. That would be very cool in order to aggregate these cars. I think this will most likely look like an aggregation rather than individuals being able to feed or backfeed from the grid.
Awesome. Next question is, what is the minimum order of kilowatts for top brands?
So that's a good question too. We don't really have minimums per se. I think to answer this shortly, the smallest system we're typically selling, I would say, is 9 or 10 kilowatt hours. Most people are going to draw more than that, or they want a few kilowatt hours for a few days. So even if we look at my lowest example of my house for 4 kilowatt hours, like I wouldn't even want a 4 kilowatt hour solution, because I'd rather just get a 10 kilowatt hour solution and know that will last me 2.5 days. So typically we're looking at 9 or 10 kilowatt hours for the smallest, and up to, I would say, 30 for a typical home would be the most. I mean, sure, we do 40 kilowatt hour systems or more, but the average is going to be 9 or 10 on the small side, and then anything between like 10 and 25 for the medium sized.
Okay, next question is, do you have an estimate for how much a smart electrical panel like the span or the lumen will affect installation time when compared to rewiring a sub panel?
Great question. Also, I want to say the lumen takes 90 minutes to install. So take that with a grain of salt on how long you think it would take to rewire a sub panel. I think that would take way longer. The sub panel takes way longer. And the span panel, I don't know much about span because they kind of work in their own channel. I think it takes a long time. So for the span panel, you'd have to consider the installation of the full main service panel and the concept of having the opportunity cost of rewiring every single load as a smart load, because that's the value you're gaining. But lumen takes 90 minutes and then you have everything automated. So that's kind of where that is. And in terms of price, I'm not really sure, again, because those kind of work in their own channels.
Awesome. We're out of questions.
All right. Thanks, Julia. Thanks everybody for chiming in. I appreciate the participation. And this will be on our YouTube channel shortly, probably by the end of the week. So thanks everybody. Oh, for a minute, I'll stay on here so you can just write down my email if you need anything. All right. Have a great week.